Republican leaders abruptly cancelled a series of key votes in the House of Representatives as the government shutdown crisis spirals out of control. Tensions exploded on Capitol Hill as lawmakers scrambled to find a way forward, but deep divisions within the GOP have left the party paralyzed and unable to pass even the most basic funding measures. The move came after a day of closed-door meetings, frantic phone calls, and public clashes that revealed the full extent of the chaos engulfing Republican leadership. The decision to pull the votes shocked even some senior lawmakers, who had been told just hours earlier that a deal was near. Instead, House Speaker Mike Johnson emerged from a tense conference meeting with grim-faced colleagues and announced that the planned votes would be postponed indefinitely. The announcement immediately triggered panic and anger among members, some of whom accused their own leadership of losing control of the chamber. With just days left before federal workers face another missed paycheck and vital government services begin to shut down, the sense of urgency has reached a fever pitch. But despite the looming consequences, House Republicans remain locked in internal warfare over how to proceed. Hardliner conservatives have demanded massive spending cuts and new border restrictions as conditions for keeping the government open, while moderates warn that such measures will never pass the Democratic-controlled Senate. The result has been gridlock, frustration, and a growing sense of political collapse within the party. Sources inside the leadership team described the atmosphere as one of confusion and despair. Staff members were seen rushing through hallways carrying folders and briefing materials as leaders tried to piece together a last-minute rescue plan. At one point, tempers flared so badly that shouting could be heard from inside the Speaker's office. The decision to cancel the votes was reportedly made after it became clear that there were not enough Republican votes to pass even a short-term funding bill. Several members of the Freedom Caucus, emboldened by their leverage in a slim GOP majority, refused to compromise. They insisted that leadership stand firm on cutting federal spending and tightening immigration controls, even if it meant forcing a government shutdown. Meanwhile, Democrats accused Republicans of playing dangerous political games with the livelihoods of millions of Americans. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries blasted the move as reckless and irresponsible, calling it a betrayal of the public trust. He urged Speaker Johnson to allow a bipartisan vote on a clean funding bill that could pass immediately if brought to the floor. But so far, Johnson has resisted such calls, fearing backlash from the far-right faction that helped secure his leadership position. Behind closed doors, aides say he has been struggling to balance competing pressures from different wings of his party. One senior Republican described the situation as a powder keg ready to explode. Across Washington, the effects of the standoff are beginning to ripple. Federal agencies have started preparing for a prolonged shutdown, instructing employees to halt non-essential operations and brace for unpaid furloughs. National parks are closing their gates, air traffic controllers are warning of potential delays, and families relying on government assistance programs are growing increasingly anxious. Economists warn that even a brief shutdown could disrupt markets, delay paychecks for millions of federal workers, and cost the economy billions. The longer it drags on, the worse the damage could become. Wall Street analysts have already begun factoring in the risk of prolonged instability as investors brace for turbulence. The Biden administration has urged Congress to act swiftly, warning that time is running out. President Biden, speaking from the White House, called on Republicans to put the country above politics and pass a funding bill immediately. He reminded lawmakers that the American people expect their government to function and that political brinkmanship helps no one. Despite these appeals, there is little sign of progress. In the Senate, Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said his chamber would move ahead with its own funding plan, hoping to pressure the House into action. But even if the Senate passes a bipartisan measure, it remains unclear whether Speaker Johnson could bring it to the floor without triggering a revolt among conservatives. Many in Washington are comparing the current crisis to previous shutdowns, particularly the one in 2018 that lasted 35 days, the longest in U.S. history. That shutdown was widely seen as a political disaster for Republicans, damaging their credibility and costing the government billions. Yet despite that painful memory, the GOP appears headed toward another self-inflicted wound. Political strategists say the ongoing chaos could have devastating consequences for the party's image ahead of the next election cycle. Polls already show that voters are growing increasingly frustrated with what they see as dysfunction and extremism in Congress. A new survey released today found that a majority of Americans blame Republicans for the current impasse and fear that Washington is becoming incapable of solving basic problems. Inside the Capitol, exhausted staffers and lawmakers are bracing for another long night of uncertainty. The mood is grim, with many privately admitting that there may be no way to avoid a shutdown at this point. Some moderates have begun discussing a possible discharge petition that would allow bipartisan coalition to bypass leadership and bring a funding bill to the floor directly, but such a move would be politically risky and could trigger retaliation from hardliners. The pressure on Speaker Johnson is immense. Elected just months ago after his predecessor was ousted in a historic vote, he now faces the same internal fractures that have plagued the GOP for years. His ability to navigate this crisis could determine not only his own political survival but the future of the party itself. In public, Johnson has maintained a calm tone, insisting that negotiations are ongoing and that Republicans remain committed to responsible governance. But behind the scenes, multiple sources describe a leader under siege, struggling to maintain control of a conference that no longer trusts him. Several members have openly questioned his leadership, while others whisper about potential replacements. As the clock ticks down, both sides are dipping in. Conservatives say they will not be bullied into accepting another spending deal that fails to address the nation's growing debt. Democrats say they will not allow extremists to hold the government hostage. The result is a dangerous stalemate that threatens to push the country into a full-blown shutdown. Outside the Capitol, protesters gathered with signs demanding action. Some called for an end to political games, while others blamed both parties for the dysfunction. The scene underscored the growing anger and fatigue among Americans who feel caught in the middle of Washington's endless power struggles. As the night wore on, lawmakers continued to huddle in private meetings, searching for any path forward. Rumors swirled about possible compromises, including a short-term continuing resolution to keep the government open for a few more weeks while negotiations continue. But even that modest plan faces deep opposition from within the GOP ranks. For now, the only certainty is uncertainty itself. With no clear plan and no unity within the majority party, the United States stands on the brink of yet another preventable crisis. Each passing hour brings new tension, new finger-pointing, and growing fear about what will happen when the money runs out. In the coming days, the pressure will only intensify as federal workers, contractors, and millions of citizens demand answers. The fate of the government and perhaps the credibility of Congress itself hangs in the balance. Republicans face a choice between compromise and collapse, between governing and grandstanding. But as tonight's abrupt cancellation of votes shows, the party is still searching for a way out of the chaos it created. Whether they find it before the government shuts down remains to be seen, but one thing is clear.